This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you proudly by The Eye Collector, now available from Image Comics and wherever comics are sold.
Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. My long-suffering co-host, Justin Curry, has invaded America. He's off to MegaCon. He is part of a Canadian envoy of creatives who are going to bring joy, hope, and prosperity back to America. Thank you, Chasing Artwork, for your service.
Fighting the hard fight.
That's right.
Oh, man.
Joining me today is my long-suffering co-conspirator, Dr. Jonathan Ball, and producer extraordinaire, Dan Vadeboncoeur. Now,
I bring America only terror.
No, that's not true. Okay, we have another export to talk about soon enough. But listen, this episode is about a very specific event we're excited about, and we want to talk about it while we're excited, and we're getting on the record while we're excited. I don't want to be too vague. We're going to get very specific, dear listener, right away. But before we do that, I want to talk to young Jonathan Ball, but a young lad turning the spinner rack of his local gas station.
No, they never had a spinner rack, but yes, I would go to the gas station, as you say. After church, the deal was if we went to church with mom and didn't cause a fuss and so on, we could then stop at the gas station on the way home and buy a comic. It was like the deal she made with me and my brothers. So we each get to pick a comic.
Now, being prescient for a minute, did they know that you would one day call yourself on a business card the poet laureate of hell while they were taking you to church as a young boy?
Who's to say? But in any case,
It may have had an influence on that.
Yeah,
the thing to understand about that time, which people won't understand unless they're of a certain vintage, is that if you're in a small town and you're in that time, it's like turning on the TV. You have to watch what's on. Right. So you have to read the comics that are on the spinner rack. And because I was in the middle of nowhere, like I grew up in a very small town of 42 people according to Google is who lives in this town. And so this was actually in a neighboring town where there's a couple hundred people, kind of thing. But anyways, you just get whatever they had that week. They may not have.
You may make that town famous. I just realized. You may put it on the map as the birthplace
They might put
of Dr. Jonathan Ball.
That'd be awesome.
I don't know about that, but
I'm gonna make that sign, and I'm gonna put it up in your town.
But the thing you get into is like, what do they even have at the gas station? They may not bring Batman in every week. They may not bring Spider-Man in every week. I would constantly be frustrated.
Now, I want to point out to many dear listeners that because we are both of a certain vintage, you may be asking yourself, what are you talking about comics at the gas station? That's not a thing. That was the thing, right? Newsstand distribution was an important part of how people found out that Spider-Man existed.
It's a newsstand, exactly what you
I went to 7-Eleven for mine, but it was the same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. There's no comic store where I lived, the closest comic store was in Winnipeg. Anyways, what you'd get into was it would be weird what they had. Who knows why they had what? They would have sometimes, Spider-Man, Batman. Sometimes they wouldn't have it. Sometimes they just skip an issue. Sometimes they'd skip a series. When Image Comics came around, they started to have erratically Image Comics. And then sometimes they'd have weird random things. I remember they had, at one point they were republishing Sandman. Vertigo was republishing Sandman and issue by issue, and so they would sometimes have a Sandman issue, sometimes they wouldn't. They would have Ralph Snart sometimes, which was a really obscure thing, fantastic comic that people don't remember. But Now Comics put it out. It was kind of briefly large. But
I remember Ralph Snart, yeah.
But they would have that, and then they would just suddenly not have it all of a sudden.
So what you don't know about, but maybe you were the recipient of, was something called the black and white comics boom, where there was a whole bunch of reprints around that then got pushed into newsstand rurally,
and they would sometimes
other
color
places.
them and release them. I think Bone, they did that too.
But shops, the point I'm making is that shops in the early 90s could get a bunch of old 80s black and white comic stuff from the distributor that was just being slushed out And so it would show up. And there were these really cool indie darlings that would end up in the newsstand racks because the shops had ordered them for
And
nothing.
you just, for whatever reason, they would have weird
Here
things.
in Canada, anyway.
And then sometimes just get one issue of something. Like, I remember at one point Marvel was publishing Hellraiser style. It wasn't Hellraiser, but it was like Clive Barker had been given an imprint at Marvel, and he had like come up with a couple of random new series, and they were publishing. So I get like the first issue of one, and then the third issue of another. It was like some weird future world that Clive Barker invented.
And this is what you bought after going to church?
Yeah, you just because we were also the latchkey.
The Razor line.
Razor line, yes.
Yes.
So there's no oversight at all, like what we were doing, right? But like but anyhow, so what was really great was when Image Comics came about. To your point, because when Spawn hit, when all these when Todd McFarlane and the other artists of that ilk left Marvel and so on and joined Image. Or founded Image. What was great about it was you had that little weird 90s boom of comics because it was already this boom. And then this, the Image and the rise of indie comics in a major way happened. So then it was even more erratic because there's more comics. They'd bring in weird special issues, but never another issue.
Enter young Gregory. So Gregory and his good friend Gary would go to newsstands all over Winnipeg and find comics. And this was like back in the, I'm trying to think, 85-cent days, right? And there was like a big deal when comics went to $1.25. That really messed me up. But we would go all over and we would find stuff wherever you could find it. And then we found out that there was such a thing as a comic store. Right, because you have to remember this is pre-internet,
and you could subscribe in the mail too.
That's right.
Remember, you could do that to comics.
Nobody is advertising their comic store on the radio anytime that I'm listening to the radio. Like this is a very different time where you found out through word of mouth that there were specialty shops, right? And we found a few places, and we would lie to our parents. Gary would say, "Yeah, I'm going to stay at Gregory's house." I would say, "I'm going to stay at Gary's house," and then we would go downtown. We would set that up because we didn't know when we were going to get home from taking the bus downtown to the parts of towns our parents would not want us to have been in. And so we had these alibis. And then if we showed up at whoever's house after, then it was fine, right? But we didn't want to get in trouble for being late. So we would always say we're at the other. It was like classic telephone stuff. And we would go downtown to places we ought not have been or pass through areas on foot when we didn't really know where we were. Again, this is pre-internet, so you're just looking at an actual fold-out map of your city to try and figure out where the bus line is going to drop you off. And we would go hunting for comics. And all that changed when I hit high school. Because in high school, across the street from my high school, was a comic store, Comic Cave, right across the street. And that's when my very first Image comic came into my, it came glittering with its fancy foil stamped cover into my knowledge that Image Comics even existed. And it was Rob Liefeld's Brigade. And it was such a big deal at the time because I got in there and they had ordered, I want to say like 200 copies of this comic. And they'd filled the main rack to the point where I was like, what is happening? What is this?
Right.
Why is it? How does it have metal on the cover? What's going on? It was exactly, I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. The art in it spoke to my teenage, like, I think I could make comics. Look, someone else is drawing like this. I could draw like this. Oh my God, it has a huge release. What? Who owns it? Oh, it's a 19, 20-year-old that made this. But it was everything I wanted, the myth of how you could break in.
That's also something people don't understand today, because when we grew up, and this is true in movies too, remember we had that indie boom in movies. When we grew up, there was this moment where it went from movies, comics, these books, these things are industries you cannot be in, to, an indie can make a comic, an indie can make a movie, an indie can, publish a book. You kind of got this shift in the industry where it was possible to like do things like make a movie like Clerks. I remember when I watched Clerks the first time, I rewound it as soon as it was done and watched it again because I recognized like, I could have made this movie. Like it's technically possible.
Looks like I'm up for a promotion.
You wipe his ass too.
And comics, it wasn't exactly the same thing, but it was like you did have this moment all of a sudden where it hadn't happened before, and now it was happening. That a guy, like Liefeld could have his own comic. He didn't have to draw Superman or Batman or whatever.
And I'm just realizing that was August of
X-Men,
1992, in case someone's trying to place that on the
geez.
timeline. That's
And it was a
Where
weird
were you?
moment because it never happened. It didn't really happen prior to that. Like I'm sure there was a underground, a very well documented underground movement in comics and so on. I'm not saying there wasn't. I'm saying from the perspective of a random kid in a small town, who doesn't get anything weird in indie and so on. Like that stuff just didn't exist. It wasn't mainstreamed. And we lived in a kind of weird time where Nirvana came out, Image came out, Clerks came out, and Tarantino came out. Like all these, you had this kind of weird groundswell of indie breaking into the mainstream for this period of time. And it was very strange and exciting.
Yes. And why that was important to the people around us was because it achieved commercial success.
Yes.
People who weren't interested in it knew about it. And suddenly that gave it a certain value. If you suddenly were interested in something, they'd be like, oh, yeah, you mean like so-and-so, And this has plagued me to this day because people want you to have been a known entity from day one, as if that's the only path in any career, right? So Image Comics is, of course, on our minds. Why is that, Jonathan?
Because we've got an Image comic.
That's right. This is our low-key, high-key, super pulp science exclusive that the Eye Collector...
That's already been announced.
It's already been announced. You'll be able to have found it. We'll have put it on social media. That the Eye Collector, all 12 issues of the Eye Collector are now going to be published by Image Comics, the third largest publisher of comics in North America. My favorite comics publisher, probably neck and neck behind Dark Horse usually, although the bloom is off the lily with Dark Horse recently. And
the number one creator-owned
creator-owned comics company. And the legend, I will say this, dear listener, the legend of the Image Comics contract being the fairest in comics land is unequivocally true.
I was surprised how good that contract is. Now, I could understand why a creative team who hadn't already finished 12 issues of a comic, they might want other things in that contract, but we don't. We want that contract.
Yeah, we want that contract.
So it was surprisingly
before we get too big for our britches here, what I want to say is that someone would say, as people always do, if they know about Image Comics and they are excited for us, and the next follow-up question is, how did you do that? I would say that we were two of the three things you're supposed to be in the creative world. The three things you're supposed to be are better than everyone else, a pleasure to hear from, and always on time. We're not the first one, not better than everyone else, but we maintained being a pleasure to hear from when we did our correspondence with Image, and we had all of our work finished. And so there was no promises, no speculation on what the entire thing would be or how it would look.
Yeah.
We showed them the entire finished run of what we sort of think of as the final arc of Eye Collector or the first arc of Eye Collector, and it really depends on whether or not people show up at the stands to get it.
Yeah, so, we could... And we're thinking about doing more Eye Collector, but we have 12 done, so we can at least promise those 12.
Now, dear listener, anyone who has heard Jonathan speak on this show before knows him to be a somewhat tranquil, somewhat inflammatory, but all business sort of guy when it comes to the world of writing. I want to tell you, I want to give you a little visual to close your eyes and imagine. The day that we got the email, we were both here in the studio, and we more or less danced around like little kids. Absolutely reveling in the excitement of possibility, simply because, and this is why I brought up our 10-year-old selves looking for those comics and finding that stuff, because the stuff you had no idea could be possible when you were little isn't possible the way you think it's possible. It's not like someone shows up, as has been said, with a clipboard and says like, oh, you're the talent we've been looking for. No, it's a grind and you have to put it together and you got to not give up and you have to have done the work and you have to have done all those things. And you, as in our case, don't have to be better than everyone else. You just have to be.
It helps.
Yeah. But you have to be true to yourself. You have to have some integrity and you have to know what the project isn't. This is what I want to.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Because you could argue it's better or worse than this or that.
Sure.
But now you're in an argument about taste and artistic issues and so on. It's hard to make those arguments. And you can try, you can fail, you can succeed, whatever. But the point is, what's more important in many ways is just to know what the thing is and what the vision is and to stick to that vision. We were just a little while before today, we were thinking about, it was raised, of course, the issue of like get other people doing alternate covers and drawing the eye collector and so on. How would that work? What direction would you give them? Because the problem with the eye collector, if you've seen the eye collector, the problem with the eye collector from the good and bad of the eye collector to draw it is he doesn't have a fixed stable form. And so there's
just all the ways I have drawn him, but those aren't all the ways he could appear.
And it's established that he appears in all these multiple ways throughout the series. Like he's never really drawn the same way twice exactly, but at the same time, there's these common elements. So we were just thinking about, well, if someone else is drawing the eye collector, what's the core of drawing the eye collector? How would you recognize it as the eye collector, for example?
I still had to pinch myself though, because I prepped this little document, which we listed what would be those elements. I put some of those visual things together. I sent it off to Jonathan, and then I stopped for a minute and I thought, this is so that other people can draw our character on purpose to promote our book through Image Comics. Now, little me isn't ready for that. Big me is like, yeah, this is just our job. We have to do it. But little me is so overshadowed, almost eclipsed by that the only way that we can do these things is by just compartmentalizing and putting aside the part of us that are fans, putting aside the parts of us that are joyous and are nervous about screwing it up, and just like, okay, we have to treat this like every project we've done up until now, be organized, be on time, make sure the work is good.
But on a simple level, the key of it is, I think a good metaphor for the whole series or any series you're working on or any artistic project you have. You have to explain to someone else now what the thing is and what it isn't. Mm-hmm. And those two things go hand in hand. He's got eyes circling around his head. He's got a toothy grin. He's not always a human, roid shape.
Yeah.
He's not always,
he was living on the moon until he remembered people lived on Earth.
So he's got a iconographic association with the moon. He's got an icon, but he's not associated with this other thing. Like, you're sort of always there's that push-pull always, I think, in any artistic project of like, what is it and what isn't it? You have to kind of be clear on both things.
Yeah. And
as long as you're clear on what it is and what it isn't, everything is just being filtered through that decision-making matrix.
And we've said this before about this project, is that we set out when we first, now keep in mind, we did not know about this path that we are now on. We instead thought we were on a different path. And that path was, hey, we're going to make the least commercial work we have ever made because we have this wild idea that's very dreamlike, very artistic, breaks a lot of rules. And the only way to undertake it is not to fall into the constraints of what would be commercial.
So I want to put it that way because it could very well be the most commercial idea we've ever had.
Well, it might end up being. But what I'm saying is when we set out...
It's more mainstream is maybe the word I'd use.
But what I'm telling the dear listener is that when we first brainstormed it, we used the words, the least commercial work we've ever done.
No, I don't.
Yes.
I remember saying it should be weirder. Right? It should be stranger. It should be stranger because this is our direction.
Weird, yeah.
We were talking to Lyndon when we brought him in as letterer, which is really early on. The thing always was like, it needs to be weirder. We need to push it further. Let's read this page and make it stranger.
I'll make a real specific point about that, is that usually the letterer's job is to not be noticed. And some of the notes that we gave Lyndon as a letterer was the eye collector breaks rules the universal rules of comics as being contained within these images in a sequence. He knows, he's aware of those rules. He can break the panels. He can move between them. He can reach across them. So the lettering also has to break those rules.
How do I put this to you? You're pushing up daisies. You're in permanent nap time. You're fertilizer. Hey, is any of this sinking in? You're dead. Dead.
So here's a real precise example. So when people see the second issue in the series, there's a page where the character Nathan is watching television. But there's nothing on the television. In the first draft of how you drew it, there was nothing visual on the television. And then in a revision of that draft, we decided to put words on the television, like, which of course just in and of itself is weird. Like he's watching a TV show that's just a bunch of words.
Yeah.
And then, then we were trying to give Lynn the direction, like, put the words on the TV screen, but then have them float off the TV screen because he's seeing the words, but also it's a song. And he was having a hard time understanding that at that point. And then for this reason you're talking about. And then you came in and just did it. And then once he sort of seemed to see that, it just seemed to click for him. And then in later issues, he's doing wilder and weirder stuff than that.
Yeah.
But it's exactly that principle. It's against the lettering principle.
To be noticed.
So just takes a minute of adjustment,
Yeah.
He really ran with it. He does some really fantastic stuff in the course of the series.
Yeah, he's very conscious of not overruling the core idea on the page or of the character with a lettering choice. And sometimes we said, no, overrule what seems normal.
And there's a moment, just to bring it back to Image Comics. So there's a moment in that same issue, which is this, you listening will be the second issue, where when the eye collector comes into the house, there's a thud sound, and Gregory's rendered that thud visually. So in my script, I was like, this thud should be like a page visual element, just like in Gideon Falls by Image, the critch. It should be like the critch. And I gave him like this page reference. I don't know if you ever looked at it, so there's this real Image DNA in not just my work, but also in that particular project.
Listeners will know that when I'm given a reference, I usually avoid it because I'm afraid it will overly influence what I'm working on. So I don't think I looked it up. Gideon Falls. I haven't read Gideon Falls. You have.
So if you haven't read
them,
it,
but I haven't looked at them. If we get our druther, if we ever on our,
but the sound effects, the way they approach sound effects in Gideon Falls was a real influence for some of the things we're doing in the Eye Collector.
On your list of wishful thinking was hoping that artist would do an alternate cover for us.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it'll happen. We'll see.
So can I ask, how did this happen? You guys were originally published on, it was Heavy Metal.
Heavy Metal.
So, and you
Not
had
all
a
of
run
them.
there.
A couple of them got published in Heavy Metal in an earlier form.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yes, we had an original contract with Heavy Metal. And to break our contract with Heavy Metal wasn't as hard as it sounds because the company was going through, let's call it a massive restructuring. And what I said at that time when we were thinking about, like, how do we get our rights back? How do we do stuff? How do we pivot? I said, Jonathan, everyone is out for blood. Everyone's chasing money. They're all lawyering up. Let's be the only guys who send an understanding letter to the people in charge that say, we know publishing's hard. We know it's a slog. We know it might take forever, but we'd really like to get our rights back. And we'd like to begin that process as slow as it will take. We'd like to begin that now. This is our formal request for that. And we got, I'm paraphrasing, but more or less a correspondence that said, you're the only guys that haven't threatened us. We'd like to move you to the front of the line.
Don't need any money. We don't expect this. We just want, we're just going to take it somewhere else if you're not going to do it.
Yeah. So that was...
Which is already in the contract that we could just do that. So we didn't really need to do any complex process.
And in the interest of full disclosure, because that's sort of like who we hope is listening to this show, we revised the original Heavy Metal contract to include the ability to fire them.
And we took out the clause. The really specific thing we did when we revised that Heavy Metal contract, which I think also was a good contract.
Oh my God, it was a good contract. Yeah.
But also the one major change we made to it was there was a clause in it, which is standard of these kinds of contracts. There was a clause that under certain conditions, they could pay you a chunk of money and take the rights. And it was a fair amount of money, but we just took it out.
Yeah.
Now, many people want that money.
Yeah.
and are happy to sell their rights. But we were like, let's just take it right off the table.
Because it was worth more to us than that.
Well, and if it was ever actually worth more than that, you don't want the clause in the contract.
Yeah.
If it's never worth that, they'll never execute the clause.
That's right.
If it's ever worth that, you don't want
That was our thinking at the time.
preset clause.
But because we were already changing that clause, making a few other changes made
Right.
sense. And then they approved those changes, and then we all signed that contract, which basically said that we could terminate it also. And so exercising that ability meant that we could say, now we'd like our stuff back, please.
Yeah, it was, kind of weird. It was a scenario of like, technically speaking, the way it was originally worded in that contract was, if we want to do something, they have the right to say yes. But if they say no, we can go somewhere else. And so at this point, they're not putting the book out anymore.
Yep.
So when all that
So now it's
water
ours.
flowed under the bridge, we ended up with this complete series that we loved.
Because we were still making it for
Yeah.
no real reason at that point.
Except that we liked making it. And
I think you guys sold it at your tables and
yeah,
stuff,
and
right?
we also
We had some
and
copies, yeah.
it did not hurt us that it got picked up by heavy metal. That really helped us in a lot of arenas. So that was
Yeah.
really good.
And we
And
still like heavy metal.
yeah. And so then I can remember us sitting in here thinking, well, what should we do with it? I guess we'll do what we always do with our own projects, is we'll produce it ourselves. And we created two parallel thought experiments, which was, how could we possibly afford to produce a full color hardcover big book like this the way we would most want it? And what would that cost us? And how would we get it shipped? And where would it go? And how would we sell it? And we did that. We just played that whole game out. And then at the same time, we said, and what if a larger publisher was willing to publish it?
Yeah, what would
Who would we say yes to that would stop this plan?
Yeah, we made a whole plan of how we want to do it if it's back to us.
And we said there's
even-
only one.
and then there's only really one, which is Image.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
There's nothing else. Not Dark
No,
Horse or anything.
no one could have stopped us from doing it ourselves.
Everyone else
except
wants
that.
to take the rights from you, and we don't want to sell the rights.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay.
And so
Because it's too weird a book. Once they have, it's not even like we think they're worth a ton. It's just like, again, you have to kind of just, I always think about it when is like, the book is the boss, the project is the king. You have to do what it says. And, the reality of a thing like the Eye Collector is it's too weird. Anyone else would want to make it less weird.
Yeah.
And you can understand why. They're not wrong to maybe try to make it less weird.
and dare I say, a larger publisher, like if I gave it to my agent and he took it to HarperCollins, say, there's going to be notes.
Yeah.
There's going to be change notes that they are entitled to because they will put hundreds
And
of
they might
thousands
be
of
right,
dollars
but
behind it.
that's not what this project is.
Yeah. So since there was only one publisher that was someone who would make us hesitate, then Jonathan said, well, we better put an image pitch together then. And he said it kind of as a joke, but then he told Lyndon, start a folder and let's get everything we need into it. Look up everything we need to do. And that's what we did. We reviewed it.
And then we weren't going to really send it, honestly, at
Yeah.
one point. We put it all together and we're like, you know what, this isn't going to fly. And then we just
That's
kind of
literally
started moving forward with publishing it ourselves.
started getting quotes from printers.
Okay.
Started breaking it up. We went to the Toronto Comics Arts Festival. We went for dim sum.
Mm-hmm.
We had I think a breakthrough idea of how to reorganize the content of the Eye Collector into a much more cohesive, strong start. How we would release it as certain volumes ourselves and how we were going to do it. And once we put it together that way, we liked it again.
It started making more sense because
Yeah.
we reorganized which issue was the first issue. And
Because it's a dreamlike story, so it had that capacity
Yeah.
to do that.
yeah,
And then once that was together, I think Jonathan said, well, we should send it again.
I think even that, no, at that point, we hadn't decided to send it. we decided
not
we
yet?
weren't going to, we decided we killed the idea of sending it to anyone.
That's right.
But then
We
for a
stomped our
separate,
feet and said it's
for a
our project.
separate reason, because of our Last Breed books, for a separate reason, I was talking to Scott Snyder. He had given us a quote for Last Breeds. And as I was just talking to him, I mentioned, well, we got this Eye Collector thing. We'd talked at one point about Eye Collector, and he'd asked basically what we were doing with it. Did we ever get the rights back from Heavy Metal?
And if memory serves, you had
He
shown
suggested
it to him.
showing it to Image.
That's right. And you showed it to him.
He had said specifically, he goes, no one's going to take this book.
That's right.
He goes, except, Image might like it. I was like, you think Image would want this book? He's like, yeah, maybe.
What doesn't sting, but is a little bit sting-ish, is that the very first time that my work was ever presented to someone who is a unequivocal taste maker in the world of modern comics, he was like, yeah, this is really weird. People will not publish this.
He liked it, but he was like, no one's going to want this book. He goes, other than maybe Image. And I just kind of dismissed it. He had said it like 3 times over like the course of a few months. And I just kind of kept dismissing it because I'm like, yeah, it just seems too weird.
Well,
Image was doing really increasingly weird stuff, though.
Yeah, they were. But I'll also say this.
So it was my own fault. He obviously knew more, and he was right.
You sent me to hell, Jason. I'm here to return the favor.
Compare all of this advice we're getting, all of these ideas that we have, our ability to like have a crazy plan to do it ourselves, and add to that the number of time we spent together on the road, going to shows, being at post-convention events, talking to people. What you're always doing when you're in comics, dear listener, and anyone who says they aren't, they're not being true to themselves, maybe, is that you're hoping to meet the person that can give you an opportunity.
There's a funny story about that too, though.
Right, yeah, but hold on. And so we are going to all these places, and every time I would talk to someone who I knew either well or tangentially, how'd you get your Image book? They'll go, it's impossible. There's no way. It's so hard. Even when we're on the inside, every book is sort of new every time. So you don't have an in, because unlike other publishers, they're basing it on the book, not the creative team. They have to really like the book. Right. It doesn't matter what you did before. You're submitting the new book now again, and they have to like it. So it's not you don't have a sure thing. It's not like the comparison would be if HarperCollins had picked it up. I don't have to convince them to put out iCollector 2, but I would have to convince Image Comics to put out iCollector 2, right? Because they'd have to see it again and like it. So there's like a different kind of, it's in many ways more honest in that regard, because they love comics. Eric Stevenson, who is the big boss over at Image, he loves comics. He's been in the game his entire adult life. Right from those early Image comics, all the Extreme Studio stuff with Rob, he'd been there for it all. And so the fact that it stood out, I think, is a real surprise, but also like, God, it gives me such a warm fuzzy.
To your point, like when you're like, oh, you go to these cons, you try to meet people, you think, oh, maybe this person's the person. So when Scott, kindly, introduced us to Eric, is like, hey, maybe you want to think about this iCollector book. He reached out saying, hey, would you guys, could we get together at the New York Comic Con? And I said, no. Now I'm turning down a meeting with him because it's Thanksgiving in Canada at that weekend.
We were supposed to be going, and then we weren't going. Then were we doing New York?
And now I'm like, well, I guess this Image deal's done. Like, I was like, I'm happy to send it to you, but I can't meet.
And dear listeners, America,
but other publishers,
America was dicey at that time. It continues to be dicey. So like these things, we're all part of our.
But other publishers that would kill the deal. They'd take it as an insult. It would be like, but he of course didn't take it that way, and was, ended up doing it anyway. But I was like,
we were planning to do it ourselves, or maybe do it through distro with Jonathan's new arrangements with Stranger Fiction. And so it behooved us to get it was much better to get a fast no than a slow yes. Mm-hmm. And so I actually used that phrase.
We assumed he had rejected it at a certain point.
We just assumed we hadn't heard back.
And I turned down the meeting he offered.
So we're going to send an email that says really clearly, we have another opportunity with the book. Here's the book again, in case you've lost the link or you don't know where it's at. A fast no is better for us than a slow yes.
Yeah, we'd still rather do it as Image than anything we're doing.
We're not going to sit around and wait. We're going to just do something with it. And so if you can give us a quick no, we'll relax. Mm-hmm. We'll unhitch.
So we're happy to take a yes.
Yeah, we'll unhitch our expectations from this, and we'll all move on happy. And I one day want to look him in the eye and ask, like, did that have bearing? The fact that we kind of said, maybe we don't need you.
Well, we didn't exactly say that, but it was more like trying to make it not sound like that. You know,
I
right?
didn't want to sound desperate. I
We were
get it.
trying
You're
to,
like,
we were trying, but we're trying to sound like, you know, really specifically, like it was more like we were trying not to write off the possibility of going with Image, thinking it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
We were trying not to say no for him. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Because, but up
We
to
were
that,
also, this is another thing for the dear listener to know, we were also really conscious of our cash flow and our schedule for printing and when we could print things, and if we were going to have to do it ourselves, when that would start.
and we'd pushed it back for years already.
Yeah,
for this reason.
And we were just so, I won't speak for Jonathan here, I was just so hungry to have it be available. I didn't care if people didn't like it anymore or whatever. I just wanted to say we did it and we put it in front of an audience, and now whatever happens happens.
And it's been really frustrating in the in the last few years. What I'm so happy about with the Image, not only that it's Image, and not only have they been great so far, but I've been feeling for years like the best thing I've done is this work nobody has seen.
Absolutely true.
It's just been driving me crazy.
And this book breaks more rules than I've ever broken in comics, while still really underlying my deep love of comic storytelling. And so I also wanted it to be seen. And Jonathan made this really punny, because I like puns. I enjoyed this. He pointed out that the eye collector has now collected the best eye in comics. Right, the Image Comics logo is
that's right,
big lowercase I, and it was been like a real joke that, like, well, I guess he's done everything that he's ever promised to do for us, and now it's going to be out in the world. Now, does this mean anyone will buy it? Who knows? No, doesn't even mean any of that.
well, it means more distribution. You guys are going to be in comic book stores. Are you going to be on the gas station
think-
shelf?
No, they don't.
Well, they don't do that anymore. But
Oh,
There is no such thing as newsstand distribution in comics anymore, and that's
Right.
I see stuff at Walmart. What does that mean?
that's a different thing.
Okay.
That's a different thing. That's a great experiment. And the people who began that experiment, my hat is off to them. I hope it succeeds, because more comics in more hands, I'm for. I don't care who's publishing them. More comics in more hands, I'm for.
I'm gonna cut you into 50 pieces and mail you to every state.
The real focus, as a person who used to own a comic store, now I know that the first line of who you're marketing the book to is still not the reader. It is now we are marketing to the retailer. And that's a whole weird world of trying to write stuff that a person who's ordering for their individual kingdom, their store, their little place, their little carved out nerddom, has to be like, yeah, I want to share this with the people whom I care for. And people who run comic stores in that direct market, they are gatekeepers in many ways. And so we have to then knock on the doors of those gates.
And Gregory came up with this great marketing line for the series, which is "seeing is believing," you know, which plays so nicely into the eye theme, but also just like the thing that to keep trying to the problem of the book and the opportunity of the book at the same time is it's a very weird book. And so I think the good thing about it is it's been designed really specifically so that every issue is a sort of weird little world. It's got a self-contained logic to it. You could just read that issue in isolation. There's also this longer story. There's a path in the story, a place it has in the story, but a lot of the issues are super self-contained. Like they're in a tower of blades and they have to get out of the tower of blades. Like it's like that contained at times, even though that's a larger story beat. But you could just ignore the larger story.
Jonathan and I never talked about this, but you'll understand where I was coming from. And I didn't talk to Jonathan about this at the time because you have to use the right nouns and verbs that people will understand when you're talking creatively. So I didn't ever say to him, I'm trying to do self-contained Star Trek episodes with each issue of the book where there's like a single sort of visual problem that can be solved each episode.
Well, I was thinking
so that you might know the characters and they're moving through it, but there's a cool thing each chapter that's unique to that chapter. And we do some callback to other things, but you get to have this.
And it has the beginning, middle, end. You know, it's even though it's a serial story for a number of issues, a lot of them are just, you could just pick that issue up and put it down.
Right.
in my brain, it's good for a retailer in the sense that anything you really do have a bunch of jumping on points. It's not just like a talking point.
So you basically wrote the comic for your younger self that you could buy off the gas station thing.
What if they just found one of them, or just this is the first thing they found, and they couldn't get the earlier ones, which is hard to do nowadays?
Yeah.
Would it still be cool?
Yeah.
And maybe it won't make super sense, but it doesn't. Even if you just read the whole thing, it might not make sense. Frankly,
those
really selling this comic.
Those familiar with our work will probably agree.
But it's got to be cool. I was talking before we recorded. Like, it's got to be like Todd has this great interview, Todd McFarlane, where he's
on a first name basis. Now you guys are both image published.
I don't know.
No. I just want to clarify before you tell the story.
Time.
We don't know Todd McFarlane. We talk about Todd around here like other people do in comics. Uncle Todd, the Todd father.
Yes.
He's so important in that way. We are not trying to pretend our familiarity.
It's a great interview where he's drawing, something while he's being interviewed, and he draws like some chains around Spawn. He's like, got to put some chains there. Kids love chains, and people make fun of it, but it's such a great storytelling, artistic thing. It's like, hey, if you're here picking up an eye collector, you want to see some eyes. You want it like, what's the promise I've made to you with the title of the Eye Collector? What's when you open it up, what do you want to see? You want to see some weird, interesting things you've never seen in another comic, or at least you haven't seen lately in a comic. You want it to be bombastic. You want it, there should be like things in this issue for you, even if you've never found it again.
You're talking about speaking to his little 10-year-old self, right?
Yeah.
The book is also about a deal with the devil. So it speaks to your little boy out of church.
In a sense, yeah.
Right? This story is definitely a bad influence to little kids coming out of church. It definitely is.
But from a retailer's point of view, like, I want to make it like my sort of like nudge towards the retailer, right? And everything we write that's like a pressy thing or a marketing sort of thing. It's like, hey, tell people to look at this. Look at this thing. Look at it. Look at it. When you look at it, you'll get it. When you look at it, it'll work. Seeing is believing. It's weird. It's even weirder than you think it is.
Yeah.
But the weirdness is the key, the selling point. Don't be scared off by the weirdness. We're gonna get weirder. It'll get even weirder. I promise you, the weirdness. I promise you something that you may not like it, but it won't be what you saw before.
Yeah. And there is a very clear story. There's a clear theme. There's a clear direction. There's a propulsive element through the whole thing. All the stuff that we care about as storytellers, we used in the Eye Collector. But the stuff that we always wondered, could you do this in a comic page? We also did that.
There's nods to David Lynch. If you like David Lynch, it's got again, we'll see how many people care about it the way I maybe care.
Yeah, there's no way to
things.
know. But I will say this. I want to say this because it was in this press release.
It's not your grandmother's comic.
Yes, not your grandmother's comic. Wednesday, June 24th. No matter where you are, dear listener, on Wednesday, June 24th, you can guarantee that Gregory is going to be standing in a comic store looking at that book on the shelf. Simply because how cool is that? Like, that's everything. All the other businessy nonsense that go on with trying to do it as a creative career will be second to the fact that I want to stand there and have touched the culture that I so adore.
This is the bargain. If you need my army, you can see Wanda again. What is your answer? Yes! Yes, I will lead your army! Anything for Wanda!
So one thing that happens is you get this team behind you, which if you're in indie comics, you don't get a lot. So one of the last things I want to say about this excitement, about giving a home to this strange creature we've created, is that in a lot of small press scenarios, it's 2 or 3 people working in the back end of a small publisher. Those are the key decision makers. I'm not talking about the big 5 publishers in comics or in prose. I'm talking about independent, local publishers. they're small teams. They're doing their best. They don't always get the weird thing we've brought to them. They don't totally get it, but they are betting on the jockey instead of the horse sometimes. And all of the correspondence that we've got from Image Comics, it's clear that the people have reviewed the work. They understand what it is. They see what we're trying to do with it. They get that it is different and why that difference is cool and interesting. And they're producing marketing materials for us where we're like, yeah, our book is like that.
Do you read this log line that somebody at Image wrote? I guess Kat put that.
Probably Kat. If it is Kat, we love you for it. Upcoming, wait, this one or this one? Oh, I see. Okay, so here we go. Upcoming cosmic horror series, The Eye Collector, a kaleidoscope thrill ride filled with Lovecraftian dread, launching this June. Also, the Department of Truth meets Jeff Vandermeer in this all-new existential scream.
I was reading that and I was saying to Gregory, like, how come I didn't really come up
How come
with
we didn't
the
write
idea that
Now,
it's like the Department of Truth meets Jeff Vandermeer? That's perfect.
Dear listener, I want to say something to you. You probably don't know what the Department of Truth is. You
should. It's a
maybe
great
you don't
book.
read Jeff Vandermeer, but if you know either of those two things,
right.
we're the same, and that's true.
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
a different
why that
direction.
works. Yeah,
because there's not any clear political dimension.
When
or
racists use
sci-fi element,
when racists use this technique for evil, they call it a dog whistle.
yeah,
Right, a phrase or a term
Right.
that only people who know hear. Right, but when it's used for good, like this, it's really to reach the people who totally understand what it is they're trying to make.
The other thing I just as my sort of little wrap up of Image praise is I was saying to Lyndon earlier, like what I'm really appreciating from Image Comics is every time a new person reaches out to me in an email, they have a piece of information they would have had to get from another person at Image. So they've taught, you can see that they've done something before they contacted me and made it my problem. And also they're asking for me for something very specific, very actionable, and it's one thing that they want.
And I will say this, we haven't given it to them yet, which sometimes I get frustrated with publishers who ask for things I already gave them months ago. Right. And they just don't want to bother looking for it.
And they have things I even have forgotten. Like when I looked at this press release, she had a piece of information. She had a paragraph she'd taken out of a pitch document that I had given to Eric at one point. So, the fact that he's taken that document and filed it and put it in a place that's accessible to other people at Image, now that they're working on this project, here's the info dump of all the stuff you need. They're not asking me to give it to them again. Like, it just speaks to there being a real process and a system. It's just it's so refreshing. Like, if you're listening to anyone who works at Image Comics,
thank you.
It is so refreshing to get an email from a person at a company I'm working with, because I work with a bunch of different people at a bunch of different companies. Some of them are great, but rarely do you get a direct, clear request for a specific thing. It's not something I already gave you in the previous email that I sent you, and so on and so forth. Like, it's so clear that Image has a business system and a process and people who know what they're doing.
Now, anyone who's heard Jonathan on the show before knows he loves...
And I have a very high standard for this
but he
particular
also
thing.
Really loves systems that can be relied upon. He likes creating them. He likes following through on them. And so when he encounters them, I think he's qualified to know when he is feeling the system enfold him in a way that will function. I will say this also about comics, having been in many different aspects of the comic book world. There are places, unfortunately, on Earth where clean water cannot be delivered every week. But every week, Wednesdays, comic stores get their comics all over the world. And so that is a logistical feat of Herculean proportions. Actually, it's Atlas, carrying the whole world on his back. That's the kind of feat.
I lost this paragraph that she's got in this press release that I wrote. But they've got it.
So they're following up on the details. We're going to keep you posted, not just on why we think we're so great, but also if this changes, dear listener, if our relationship with this process changes, just like we've done with everything in our creative journey, We'll tell you about the pitfalls. We're going to show you, obviously, we still are in the glow. That glow may wear off. And if it wears off, we're going to tell you all about it. But if you are near your local comic store or have the ability to reach out to them, you should definitely tell them to order at least one copy for you of The Eye Collector, because you might never get another chance to do so. Its on sale date for issue 1 is June 24th, Wednesday, 2026.
Nowadays you'll get a chance.
Yes.
Yeah, not in the past.
This won't be the last you hear from us, but this is us sharing our unfiltered excitement of a milestone achieved. So
congratulations, guys.
Thank you so much. This has been Super Pulp Science, and we have talked about how genre gets made. This is GMB Kamichuk encouraging you all to join the fight and make comics.